Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Yasmina Greco. I'm with O'Reilly Media, and I will be your host for today's webcast. Today, folks, we have Chris Vander presenting Secrets of Product Management, Lessons Learned from Amazon and Google. Chris is the author of the brand new O'Reilly book, Shipping Greatness, and we're really excited to have him with us today to present this webcast for you all. As we get things started, I'd like to go over a little housekeeping to help you get the most out of today's webcast. You'll want to open your group chat widget if you haven't already done so. This is where we can interact with each other during the event and where you can submit your questions for Chris. We find that our audience usually has a lot of good knowledge to share, so we encourage you all to chat freely during the event. However, if you have questions for Chris, please preface them with a capital letter Q so we know that they're for him and we can make sure he sees it for Q&A. You can also open, move, and resize any of the other widgets. If you would like to tweet from the Twitter widget today, you may need to give it permission to access your account. It will automatically append the event's hashtag to your tweets. And folks, today our hashtag is Shipping Greatness, all one word. If you should have any trouble during the event, please take a look at your help widget. If you continue to have problems, please post it in the chat room and one of our staff will help you right away. For choppy audio or stalled visuals, please try refreshing your window. And remember, the best thing you can do for a good audio stream is to close any apps that could interfere. People always ask, so we'd like you to know we are recording today's webcast, and we'll have an archive ready usually within 48 hours. And folks, at this time, it is my pleasure to turn the program over to Chris for his presentation. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Yasmina. Thank you so much for organizing this and for setting this up today. I'm really excited to be joining all of you today and talking a little bit about how to build and ship great software, particularly from a product management standpoint. Product managers are really essential parts of the software world. And I want to talk about 10 things that I think will help make all product managers a little bit more successful. But to start with, let me tell you a little bit about this fun slide that you're looking at right here. This is actually the world's largest negative. And I like this because product managers sometimes do little things that have huge impact. And if this photograph was taken in a form of a pinhole camera, basically a guy walked into a hangar, set up this giant sheet of fabric and painted it with a license of emulsion, and then just simply cracked the door a little bit and created a pinhole camera that created a picture of the landscape outside. So little tiny things can make a huge difference, and I think that's pretty interesting. Let me start by telling you a little bit about me. I worked for Amazon.com for a while as an engineering manager. I joined there after getting a master's in engineering management from Dartmouth College. And I worked on products like customer reviews and so forth. So I know how I can't gain my reviews on Amazon. I worked at Google for quite a while as a product manager, working on things like Google Hangouts, Google Apps, some of Google's client software, and that was a very interesting experience, and it was really, and some of what you'll see today comes from the integration of the different processes at both Amazon and Google that I've pulled together. And then today I work at Sales and Recognition, where I'm the CEO, and what we do is we provide image recognition services, so we can recognize faces, handwriting, and objects. We provide that to developers, the hosted service. You can find out more about that on salesrecognition.com. And I got hooked up with O'Reilly because they wrote this book called Shipping Greatness. I decided that, after having been in this industry for 15, 20 years and having written software for that long, I realized that many of us in the industry were still inventing things as we went along. And I thought it would be great to consolidate some best practices and some of the things that I saw that were incredibly helpful for me and put them into a pretty intense condensed volume so that you could take them with you and try to apply them in your own work. So we'll do a very condensed version of that today, primarily focused on the product management aspect. So let's dive in. I think one of the most important things to do is to do things that have meaning. Because if you don't care or your team doesn't care, you're just toast to begin with. You have to find ways to make things have meaning, because sometimes you're going to get jobs that just are not super attractive. The classic example is that in most software projects, there's a testing phase. And some people get really excited about testing. Others find that it's just a burden. And so a classic way that you see organizations like Amazon and Google make testing more meaningful is they build systems to do automated testing. So you write code in interesting abstractions and new ways of looking at software to evaluate it and figure out whether it's good. So you can sometimes do things that feel like they don't have meaning and find meaning in them, and that's really important. Of course, if you can start by doing something that has meaning, you're much more likely to be successful. Think about it from a customer standpoint. If what you're building is a better vacuum cleaner bag, that may not be all that interesting to customers. And it might be hard for you to get, excited about that and come home to your wife or husband and say, well, today I made a better vacuum cleaner bag. It holds an extra pound of crap. Not really all that interesting. But if you say, today I made a vacuum that not only does it never lose suction, but it actually is much easier to clean and it's more hygienic and it looks beautiful too. Then what you've done is you've done what Dyson did, and you've created something that does kind of have meaning and is interesting. It becomes a piece of art that people lug around their house and are willing to pay $600 for. So this is actually pretty powerful. Things that have meaning are good. I guess I'll share one other story, which is that one of my colleagues that I worked with at one company, he left to go run a startup. And I talked to him on the phone a couple of weeks after he left, and I said, so how's it going? He said, man, I'm working like 80-hour weeks and I'm exhausted. But, let me tell you, everything I do has meaning. And I thought to myself, wow, that's different, and that's great, because he's willing to put a lot more of himself into that because what he does is meaning. So when you look at what you do today, think, what aspect of this is most meaningful? And can I focus on that? Can I help my team focus on that? Can I help my management focus on that? And can I find meaning in sometimes meaningless things that I do? So there's a related aspect to this, do things that have meaning. And that's that things that have meaning tend to matter to users, right? We talked a little bit, I just mentioned this in the sort of vacuum cleaner example. But there's a mantra at Google that says start with the user and work backwards. So basically the idea here is it's got to matter a lot to users. I talk a little bit in the book about the way to create a successful business is to find a big problem that hurts a lot that a lot of people share. And so you've got to ask them sort of 4 questions. What's the problem? Does it really hurt? What do users really want? And then is this the right problem? So think about it this way. You might have a problem which is, let's say it's hard to send email. And you say, well, okay, does that hurt? Yeah, it hurts because it's taking up a lot of your day sending email. But then you got to ask the question, well, what does the user really want? Do they just want a faster way to type? Do they want, autocomplete so that when they type people's names, they fill out? Will that make it easier? No, probably what users really want in this case is something like a better way to get through a tremendous amount of email really quickly. Well, okay, that's actually a really real problem that a lot of us have. Many of us are inundated with email, lots of which is spam or from people that are not super critical, and I don't mean people that are not super critical. How about some email is more important than others. We know that, right? When you get mail from Jeff Bezos, you better believe that you reply to it. We used to call it Jeff mail. And, Jeff would happily send, mail, and you responded to it very quickly. Same thing goes for all executives, right? So then you can say, well, if we were trying to make it, if we're trying to solve this information overload problem, maybe we can solve it with great spam filters and with, by building some algorithms to prioritize mail. And so actually this is one of the things that I worked on early at Google, and Google ended up building a very powerful prioritization scheme within Gmail called the Prioritized Inbox that actually came completely separate from the early work that I did. And then you can ask yourself, is this the right problem? Because, the products that you end up coming up with at the end of the day, you might very well come up with things that customers don't need. Or more to the point, as a product manager, when you're brought in to new products, you very well may end up working on something that is not critical to users, could even be bad for users. So if you start with the user and work backwards, you may find that your first job as a product manager on a new product is to get rid of that product, to find a way to kill it gently, to find a way to reposition it, to take the assets that you have and the effort that's been expended and refocus that. So start with the user, work backwards, take those marketing requirements and turn it around and say, well, what really is the user looking for? And try to clarify that. If you do that, you'll find that that your team, that your customers, that your management respond very, very strongly to those core messages. Okay, so how are you going to do that? How are you going to make that change? Well, I think one of the most important things you can do is use pictures. All right, so key number 4 is to use pictures. And there's a lot of different kinds of pictures, but one of them, you can really use anything. You can use simple penning sketches. You can draw complicated flow charts in Visio or OmniGraffle. OmniGraffle is one of my favorites. I use OmniGraffle for flow charts, for wireframes, for all sorts of things, for Photoshop. And there's just a few simple things that you can do that make these so much more powerful. First off, tell the story. Put the experience in a flow that shows really what users need. One of the very senior managers at Google, Vic Condotra, who's in charge of all of social, Google Plus at Google, would frequently stop people in the middle of them explaining a feature and say, wait. Okay, so my sister Sharon comes in to the website, and what does she see? And what he's trying to do in that is he's trying to go back to the user, and he's trying to understand the story. And so as you draw these pictures, draw it from the user standpoint, and use real words, real buttons, in real positions. You'll sometimes see a lot of pictures where people have filled in things with Latin, where it says lorem ipsum and so forth. As a product manager, a core part of what you're trying to do is communicate how things work, how users are going to experience them, what it means. The words that go on a page are really meaningful in terms of explaining that. So if you're finding that to explain what a button does on a website takes a paragraph of text, you've probably got a problem. The button should be self-evident. It should be save, right, or close, that type of thing. If you have to have a really long series of words, push to audience or something, is an example where it's maybe not super clear, but I guess it's okay. It's the little console I have. You'll find that you're making the user interface more complicated, and it's a great sort of test. Secondly, in as much as you're trying to make something very real, text, buttons, positions, and so forth, you have to at the same time remove other aspects of reality that can be confusing, and that is things like color, like visual design, styles. One of the best things you can do is draw what you need to draw what you're trying to communicate on a whiteboard and take a picture of it. And just give them that picture. Or if you're going to build a wireframe, do it only in black and white. Because for sure what happens, or at least what seems to almost always happen, is when you deliver something that looks nice, people raffle around its design rather than its function. And as a product manager, your core thing is to focus on its function. So really emphasize low-fidelity graphics, high-fidelity copy, and high-fidelity scenarios. That's a key thing for me. So these things are about really working with people and communicating these ideas about users done well. So working with people is obviously a key thing, and collaboration is one of the most important parts about product management. And this is kind of obvious that you have to collaborate, but sometimes we lose focus as product managers. Sometimes we think of ourselves as the product owner. We say, well, I'm the owner, so I'm going to drive this. I'm going to make this happen. The reality is that one of your core deliverables as a product manager is to assign owners and to coordinate relationships. And so one of the things I've heard from a CEO I used to work with at a startup was that program managers, this is slightly different than product managers, but close enough. The product managers are a glue and grease roll. They glue people together and they grease the process along. And that's a collaboration thing. So to do that, you need to establish owners. You need to establish them early. So try to find people that can own specific aspects of your product and your process and really empower them to own it. That's a core part of collaboration. Hand off and step away. To some extent, you also have to step away enough to enable people to fail. That's dangerous and hard, but and it requires a lot of faith and trust, and sometimes just willingness to let things fall apart. You'll have to use your judgment about how far you want to go there, but it's a key thing to be asking yourself when you hand things off. Remember that when you built these pictures from before, you're going to hand them to engineers. You're going to hand them to marketing, support, legal. Take these artifacts that you develop, hand them out very early on. Get feedback really early on. The sooner that you get people involved, the more engaged they are. And there's the flip side of this that I hear frequently from people, which is, well, wait, if I have really unstructured, not concrete ideas, and I get too many people in, they're going to randomize that idea. They'll throw all sorts of different concepts in, and it'll be really hard to get focused. And I think that's absolutely a risk. But on the flip side, if you put these things in the right context, which is early, and we're taking in feedback, and then the goodwill you're going to earn from people like support and marketing, and the quality of the feedback you're going to get, particularly from some of these people that support many products, will be incredibly valuable to you. And the last thing you want to find is that as you're getting ready to ship, legal says to you, wait, you can't do that at all. And I worked on a funny little product, the Google Photos screensaver, which absorbed RSS feeds and showed photos. And we had built this concept. We were all very excited about it. We started working on it, and I sat down with the lawyers, and the lawyers said, wait, this stuff is copyrighted. How are we going to handle this? We had to actually talk through how to do this properly legally, and it had significant repercussions on the user experience. Just strong engineering repercussions. If we had waited much longer for that, we would have had to scrap the whole product, right? And that would have been a big mistake. So bringing these people together early and getting them engaged will really matter. It's going to increase your quality, increase your speed. Okay, so these things are about collaboration, and when you're collaborating, you're communicating. And there are communication. We can talk about all sorts of dimensions about this. For example, in the book, I talk about the core meetings you have to have and how to run them and things like that. In this case, I'm just going to call out the essential, a few of the essential artifacts I think you want to deliver to the product manager. Some of these are a little different. One of them is the press release. This is an idea that comes from Amazon. I think it's very good. The idea is that before you start the product, before you even really get funded, you should write a press release. One page that says, today we're launching product X. It's fantastic. We think it's transformative because it does Y. Jeff Bezos said blah, blah, blah about the product. By doing this, what you're doing is you're putting the most valuable features of the product forward. You're explaining why it's meaningful to users. You're explaining, why your company cares about it. And it's super powerful in terms of driving focus and clarity, because you have to distill these things down into basically 3 paragraphs. A similar approach is to look at blog posts. One of the blog posts that I like to reference, I think does a really good job of this, is the Google Plus launch blog post. Regardless of what you think about Google Plus, I think it's a really good blog post from the standpoint of it says what the core problem is, why Google cared, what they were doing to solve it, and then it positions it very, very well. The notion of starting with this blog post or press release will really help you in terms of focusing. It will help you get sort of that elevator pitch down. So when new engineers are interested maybe in working with you, or you have to go and hire somebody, or somebody asks you at a cocktail party, what is it that you work on? You've got it nailed down. So I think it's really meaningful. The second thing is a fact, frequently asked questions. This is a great document to build and maintain. As a product manager that's constantly talking across multiple different audiences, legal to marketing to HR to customer support to whomever, you're going to get lots of different questions, and you're going to get lots of questions that are the same. There are a few key things you want to do. One is you need to make sure that you answer all the questions. The other thing you need to make sure is that you're consistent in your answers. And you also need to spend as little time possible repeating yourself because you're incredibly busy, right? So the best way that I found to do this is to build a frequently asked questions document. When you get a new question, you add it to the document. You don't have to answer it right then. You can say, great, thank you. I've added it to the frequently asked questions document. Here's a link to the frequently asked questions document. What this does is it says to the person who asked the question, I cared. Look, I wrote it down. And look at these other questions. They've been answered. This one isn't answered quite yet. I'm gonna answer it. And then answer it and follow up with the person. But then next time you get this question, you can say, that's a great question. It's in the fact, see the fact. And you don't have to go and rewrite the whole thing. And if the person that you're dealing with has a concern about the answer and the facts, I'll just tell you, and you can revise that question. The frequently asked questions document becomes a living document then, where you can carve out part of it for answers that are only internal, and part of it are answers that are external. For example, one question might be, why are we doing this, and why are we really doing this? And hopefully your reasons for why you're doing this and why you're really doing this are the same, but you might have internal answers and external answers. And your internal answers might just say, and in addition to why we're doing this for users on the outside, this product has these external, has these internal repercussions. Vector has these systems or scale and so forth. So building that FAQ is very meaningful. Sometimes when you're building something, you get to move quickly, and you want to move quickly, and you can survive on many requirements. what I mean by this is you can literally write 2 pages. These numbers here, I'm sorry, I should have called them out. They're how long the document should be. Press release, like 1 page at most, right? 2 pages for fact, 2 pages for wireframe. Or more. It really, frankly, pictures get no page limit because things that are small you'll skip over, so don't worry about page limits on wireframe. But sometimes you can draw up a fairly crisp description of a product in just about 2 pages. Basically, what it is you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and what are the specific features you need. Now, for something very, very large, you're not going to be able to do it at that level of detail. You need a lot of other things. But I've actually found that a nice way to start, even on large products, is with just 2 pages. If you're very good and crisp about it, it can be really useful. So then you get into functional specs, and I actually talked. I did a whole talk a while ago. It took about 2 hours to sort of go through how to build great requirements. And what my general approach to this is you build great requirements incrementally by using these artifacts like the press release and the fact and the wireframe and your mini requirements and things like your pitch deck and so forth. You build them up over time, and then when you build a function, and then what happens is as you deliver your functional specs, which frankly you're lucky if your engineering team leads, you get to basically just assemble your prior artifacts, which is great because not that many people are going to read your functional requirements, but you really have to have them anyway because it's how the product is supposed to work. You want to try to do it in as little time as possible, and that means you want to assemble them. So you're going to put this together out of an introduction, which came from your press release. You've got your wireframes. You've got your FAQs are going to go in there. And so you're really just adding a few other things, which are some goals and non-goals. What are you trying to do, and what are you quickly not trying to do? I find that non-goals are really meaningful in terms of driving focus. Like we're really not trying to solve problem X. And you'll get your goals from your press release. I think that APIs are really meaningful if you're working with other teams. If you're just building a product that you're not expecting developers to use or you're not expecting other parts of your company to absorb it, or you're really not, you don't care much about a service-oriented architecture, and I talk in the book about service-oriented architectures. I'm happy to talk more about it if you're interested. But long story short, if other people aren't going to be using systems, you don't have to worry about it. But if you work at a reasonably large company, or you care about platform and you want other developers to consume things, you do want to talk about your APIs. You want to write them down in pseudocode, and something that looks roughly like software. And what that does is it tells your engineering team what aspects of your system are going to be exposed and have to grow. For example, one of the products I worked on at Amazon was the real names product. And that is where you have to provide a name to write a review. You can have a verified real name. You provide a credit card. And so when we looked at this, I wrote an API that the customer reviews team could consume. I just wrote the API description, the method signature, sometimes that's referred to. And I said, okay, they're going to pass in a customer ID. And from that, they're going to get a nickname and a real name and the status and so forth. And so by that, we actually ended up defining part of the data model from that. So it becomes very powerful in terms of helping engineers understand what is really necessary. There is a flip side to this, though. Sometimes, and this happens a lot to me at Google, because it's a different culture. If you try to, as a product manager, describe how an API is supposed to work or what it should look like to a group of engineers who feel like they own the entire technology stack, they will get very unhappy with you. And will tell you in no uncertain terms that you're stepping on their toes. So be careful when you do this. Know your team. And obviously you will, but this works in some places and doesn't work others. You should think about your capacity plan. Sometimes it's really hard. I heard a great lecture from the team that launched the Xbox 360 and Xbox Live, and They said we didn't know how many servers we had, so we needed to have. So basically what we did is we made a guess at what we thought our best day would look like, and then we doubled it. And then we had to scramble. But that was literally about as complex as they got with their modeling for a huge, massive service. That was pretty interesting. Talked about capacity plans. Dependencies are always great because they tell you, who you have to go and talk to, who you have to rely on. And then we talked about the facts and key milestones. So I roughly build them in these artifacts in this order. They're useful. These things are press release and functional specs and so forth. You're really going to use these to drive consensus and understanding across your team. You'll end up using this to do things like build test cases, build your customer-facing documentation, all sorts of things. So a very powerful artifact for you to build. Okay, so I think that it's really important for product managers to think about scale. What do I mean by that? I mean you have to build systems that scale, and you have to scale. So you have to build systems that can change fast. So think about, you think about your data models. Think about think about the weak points of your system, and ask yourself, what can I do to make, what's the worst thing that could happen, and what would I need to do if I had to double my capacity, or if I needed to, if I needed to replace this part of the system with something else? Are there clean interfaces between different systems? Are there, can I replace this with a different provider? If I depend on Amazon VT2, can I rapidly replace that with Rackspace in some way? Identifying what you can do, where your weaknesses are, will help you change very quickly and respond to opportunities and grow very quickly. You want to, a part of scaling is understanding what happens when you fail. So you sort of have to assume failure, like teammates are going to leave. You're going to have boxes that will die. Customer requirements will change. So what are you going to do? How are you going to, as a product manager, what can you do in terms of partnering with your engineering manager counterparts to ensure that you have staff coming in that's cross-training with the one guy who happens to know this one system, so that you build in resiliency. That's part of scaling your team, is making sure that you have redundancy within your team, as well as redundancy within your system. Another example behind scaling is understanding that customer requirements will change, and you may need to experiment very quickly. So one of the things, I'll give you an example, which is that on one product I worked on, which was a simple desktop notifier, we realized that this was going to be a product that would either be super irritating or potentially very useful, because we wanted to encapsulate a large number of notifications in one product. And what we figured was that we would have to experiment a great deal to get things right, tune it. And so what we did was we actually invested a small amount of time in building an experimental framework, something that really didn't have any functional code or a back end behind it, but something where we could just stick a few notifications in it and run experiments on people's computers and get their feedback on what worked and what didn't work. That's a form of scaling, so you can make small changes very quickly and try them. In fact, you can do this even simpler. You can use paper prototypes. Basically, just make wireframes in OmniGraffle or PowerPoint or whatever, export them as slides, and then have users click through them just by using their mouse. Like, okay, well, so now click on the save button. When they hit click, they'll go to the next slide. This is the save slide. And so this process of using a PowerPoint presentation to do sort of a walkthrough of a static product enables you to experiment with language, with button position, with different workflows very, very quickly. And so that is a form of scaling your design process. This would go very quickly. Finally, I think it's great to assume success. And what's going to happen when you get 10 times larger than you expected? There's a whole bunch of interesting engineering problems that come out of that. Did you do a good job with your sharding algorithm so that you know that you can spread across many, many boxes evenly? Does your searching work, so on and so forth? There's a balance here behind building the minimum viable product, which is something that Eric Ries talked about in his Lean Startup book, which I would recommend. Another good read. And the basic principle behind the minimum viable product is you want to do as little as possible to put something in front of the user, so you can put something in front of the user as quickly as possible. And part of what's good about that is that it's going to break. You know it's going to break. You don't necessarily know where it's going to break, but because you've spent as little time as possible in all these different aspects of your system, all these different aspects of your product, you can rapidly rip out the whole thing and replace it with something better. So that's pretty meaningful, I think. You can assume that that you will be successful, but you don't know where, and you can go in and change things very quickly. It's much easier to change things that you invested less time in, partially because your team will care less about throwing it out. Okay. So number 7, measure. You've got to measure basically everything if you want to be a good product manager. I mean, the reality is, how do you know you're a good product manager? Well, you know you're a good product manager if you have measurement. You can say, I doubled the number of users we have. Our conversion rate went from 30% to 60% with change X or change Y. So you need to have metrics in place before you launch. You need to agree on what a successful product is going to be. You need to agree on what matters. This is something in which I disagree with Eric Ries a little bit. He talked a bit about how he thinks vanity metrics are a big, sort of a big head fake in that if you pay a lot of attention to the number of users you have, well, that's a vanity metric. That may be true. It's not a directional metric. It doesn't tell you what you need to do to get more users. It does tell you how many people care. And the number of active users tells you how many people continue to care. Give you an example. One of the products I worked on was was Google Apps. Goodness gracious, Google Apps Sync for Microsoft Outlook. Boy, it had a long name. It was a little while ago. But it was a product that we shipped for Windows that ran in the background of Microsoft Outlook and enabled Microsoft Outlook to use Gmail as the back end. So it basically replaced Exchange with Google Apps, and you continue to use Microsoft Outlook, which is really meaningful stuff for the company. But when you look at that, how do you measure what's meaningful? It's hard to measure, the uplift in sales, although we were able to do that because we were able to do some longitudinal analysis and look at the inflections and so forth. But really, what I looked at was one-day active users. That is, how many users used the product yesterday and today, and the day before, and so on and so forth. Not how many users used it once in the past, say, 7 days, which would be typical 7-day active users. The point being, if you use Microsoft Outlook, you should be using it every day. If you're just using it once in a week, you're not our core business customer, and you don't count as a real user. So as long as we have users that are actively continuing to use it, that automatically is really meaningful. Now, your numbers, if your Flickr, might be very different. Similarly, another core metric, when you look at metrics, you want to look at things like conversion. How many people are coming into the website or coming into your product and actually going through to an activation state and so forth. So you'll have lots of metrics that you're looking at after the fact. And as you're going through the product as you're working on your product during the development process, you need to have metrics too. Things like, you need to know when you're going to ship. So how do you know when you're going to ship? Well, you need to know the number of bugs you have, how fast you're fixing them, and how fast they're coming in, so that you can figure out when are you going to hit 0 bugs. You need to be able to predict that. It's a core metric that you're going to live with in the later stage of your product. Just like maintaining a very simple project schedule is very important in the early stages of your development process. So you can see how much time you have left to go before you can really start paying attention to how many bugs you have. So there are metrics that you're going to live by in the middle of your project, beginning of your project where you're defining what matters, and then at the end of your project where you're trying to figure out what are the knobs that I can turn that are going to cause a stepwise transformation. You also want to do, there's a couple other things that I'll throw out there, which is after the fact, be your own customer support. Give out your email address willy-nilly. This is not a world anymore in which we have to be super paranoid about people spamming us. Spam filters are so good. Go ahead and give out your email address. Let real users talk to you. Get a sense for what's going on. These are things that are hard to measure, but they will, in terms of straight up count and metrics, but they will tell you, they will give you samples that will indicate where you need to go and investigate more. Make sure you have a dashboard of metrics that everybody can look at, everybody on your team. You can use Google Analytics for this. You can build your own and just build widgets that sit inside the site or inside your own servers, whatever you need to do. But collect core metrics on customer satisfaction, on usage, and on how people are using your product. There's an aspect of this that I'll mention that Amazon used to call it ref tagging, where you would put little tags on everything and you would track exactly what happened. Google Analytics provides a great framework for iOS that you can log timings of things, button clicks, log messages, all sorts of stuff. So today I do a lot of iOS stuff and use that framework, and I can tell exactly how users go through our apps and so forth. Very meaningful. All right. Number 9. I think Eric Schmidt is really one of the great CEOs of all time. I admire him deeply and feel like I learned a lot from watching him, listening to him, and talking with him occasionally. And one of the things that he's known to say is velocity. And in general, what he means is ship early, ship often. It reduces the risk of going down the wrong path, it drives customer feedback into your design. It means iterate, keep making changes and move quickly. So one of the reasons why Scrum has become attractive to people with its 30-day iterations is that it brings the team into a pattern of getting things done. You make a change, you push it out the door, and you make progress. There's a lot of research that's been done that shows that what motivates people more than anything else is progress, particularly in software and in other knowledge worker roles. So once you get people to be paid fairly, they don't have to be paid generously, they just have to be paid fairly. Compensation is no longer a strong motivator. Rather, progress is. So velocity, progress will help make a happy team. The other thing is, launching is not a lost effort. You'll launch something, you might not get the product response you expected. But boy, it hardened your code. It made you drive into the details. It helped you uncover fundamental design flaws. Driving to a launch, even a sooner launch, is really meaningful. You also have a whole bunch of other advantages that come out of moving quickly and putting things in shipping soon. Things like you can develop some early mover advantage if you're the first person out the door. You can help define what the conversation is going to be in the media. Your team can be more excited because they're doing something new and novel, not necessarily something follow-on and just slightly different. So as you look at all of it, you try to drive this velocity. How do you move quickly? And I think the answer is you've got to look at this just like you would look at a sports car. Smaller cars go faster, so try to stay small. Try to keep your scope small. Try not to add on a lot of features. Right? Race cars, they have no air conditioning, they have no radios. They're just a frame and a big motor. They're very dedicated to what they do. So build the simplest possible product that works. Try to keep as few owners as possible. One person to own the architecture, one person to own the marketing, so on and so forth. Driving single owners and accountability will really matter. So think about your product like that race car and distill it down and then drive it really, really fast. Okay, last point, and then we'll do some questions. You are not the boss. This is something I tried to repeat to myself every day for 6 years at Google. You are not the boss of Vander. You are not the boss. You wish you were the boss. You are not the boss. Fundamentally, I think product management is a service role. And one of the things that I tried to say to my team frequently was, hey, I'm a full-service PM. And that meant I would go get coffee. It meant I would make mocks. It meant I would write a little code. It meant I would do anything that we needed to do to help us go faster and to enable the team. So I think some would say, oh, this is a servant's art. I think those who are subscribed to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People would say that, sort of the first understand and then to be understood approach. The reality is that most of us who end up in management want to be in control. It's just, it's the way we are wired. But don't do that. It's bad because you don't scale. You can't enable fully the 10 or 20 brains of the people that work with you to be fully engaged and active in driving the product if you are trying to be the boss. If you want to guide, you only want to fight battles with clear customer wins. Otherwise, you need to let those other people try to win on their own. You want to guide direction. You need to sweat details, but try to drive the decisions on those details by going back to your core direction. So, so that's part of sort of dealing with your team as not being the boss. Another part of not being the boss is remembering that your customers are the boss. So you need to give your customers what the customers want, not what the company wants. This is sort of counterintuitive, but your company may not be aligned with your customers. That's not great, but it's reality. You as a product manager, though, frequently have enough room to make to make decisions that are better for your users, that are better than they are for your company. And what you'll find is that your company will benefit very soon in the long run. You may have to pivot to see that benefit a little bit, but it's very, very valuable. Finally, your engineers ultimately are the boss. Engineers, users I think are the final big boss, but there's another boss, and that's your engineers. You're there to serve them, and you're going to do that by helping them align with the goal, helping them understand what's meaningful, helping them understand what progress means and what it looks like. And then, you know what? Let the engineers argue with the engineers. Don't get between them. I'll give you one final little story here, which is fun. I worked on this one product. I worked on Google Pack for a while, and one of my engineers was really upset because he'd been having a problem with their team that we had a dependency on. And, I sat down with them. We talked about what we could do. And I said, okay, we'll all go and I'll have a chat with the other team and, I'll try to figure things out. And I sent them an email and I talked to them. And my tech lead, different guy, the guy who's sort of in charge of the engineering team, and my partner pulled me aside, pulled me into it and said, listen, buddy, you're the PM. You should not get involved in these engineering disputes. Get out of the way. If these guys have a problem with each other, they'll go out in the parking lot and they'll settle it amongst themselves. In the meantime, you stay focused on driving the business and the product. And I thought that was really interesting. I don't think it's completely right. I think it was right in that situation. And I think it's wonderful when you have a team that, knows that you are not enough of the boss, that they can sit you down and tell you when you're wrong. I would encourage that. And I said, okay, thank you, Soren. I will do exactly that. And I remembered it, and I didn't do that for pretty much the remainder of my career at Google. At least I tried not to. It was pretty effective. So I find that pretty interesting, and make it a looking back. So let's go to some questions. That's what I got. I'll leave it on you weren't at the boss slide, so you can all stare at the guy pointing. Let's see. I will take. I'll just go through these questions in order. I'll come in order they came in. Can you briefly outline the steps, best practices you go through to create, arrive at a minimum viable product? Sure. This is definitely a broad topic from Sherry. But let's see. The simplest possible way, I think, to look at this is what is the smallest possible scenario that a user needs to accomplish, and can you give it to, and how can you give it to them? So you start by figuring out what the user's problem is. Let's say the user's problem is that they want a better way, that they keep on losing the data that's on their whiteboards when they walk out of a conference room. So you want the user to be able to capture them and take them with. Okay, well, users can do that with a phone, so you want to do one step better. Well, what's one step better? A lot of different ways to look at this. Find the first one that you think is meaningful. So let's say it's sharing. Okay, so you're going to build a whiteboard capture system that shares, and you say, okay, to do sharing really easy, we need to integrate with the calendar to pull out the people that were in that meeting. And that's it. That's all we're going to do. So you could call that the absolute minimum viable product. And I think that would be meaningful in terms of building a really simple product. And it would help some people. It may not be the right product for you because you need to look at your underlying mission in business and what you're really trying to do. And I think that's sort of where this comes back to, which is your mission. So let's take my mission, for example, as the CEO of Scaled Recognition. My mission is to help people to understand images and to recognize what's in them. So my minimum viable product would be to take that whiteboard and to convert it into something that's understandable. So I need to convert some of those words into text. And if I can do that, then I've got something that I can, put out in front of people and give to them. What kind of development tools did you use at both Google and Amazon? What development methodology, e.g. Agile Scrum, did you use? The answer is it differed from team to team. Every team tended to do things a little differently, and that's why I built the book because the book really describes how I did things. I'll push a copy of it out there so you can see it. There's definitely my general approach is to do is to basically use artifacts from all these different processes. I use a very lightweight Google spreadsheet-based project management spreadsheet that does sort of the product planning, which is a little waterfall-y. But then within that, break things down into sort of 2-week sprints, which is sort of a little agile, and have daily stand-up. But unlike the true Scrum daily stand-up, I let everybody speak because I think it's great when the biz dev guys can come along and say, yep, and we also, closed the deal with Toshiba today, and that's great for the team to hear. They don't have to be quote unquote chickens. I think that the general approach it really depends on what works for your team, and you'll find that different individuals within your team need different things. You'll find some people are very concerned with with details and making sure they get everything right either in advance or after the fact, whereas others just really want to experiment, throw a lot of code out there, and it will be fairly low quality in terms of what it does, but it'll happen really fast. And so depending on the composition of your team, you're going to adjust your methodology. And unfortunately, you're going to have to adjust for the people in your team. One of the things that I found is that, the people in your team who are very detail-oriented are always they're more willing to do project management and tell you how far along they are, whereas those are just experimenting. They're just moving so quick. They don't really care. They don't want to follow up so much with those details. So you kind of have to help them, and that's a matter of going to their desk and sitting down with them and saying, "How much longer you got on this?" Okay, and you fill in the spreadsheet for them. That's about all you can do. Let's see. These are very short answers. I feel like we could talk about this for a long time, and I'm always happy to come and engage with you guys more on some of these things. And if you have ideas or things you'd like to talk more about, we should do that. Bring them in there. Let's see. Neil Thomas has asked, can you talk a bit about the difference in the process taken for internal products and tracking tools versus external customer-facing products? This is a great question. And I honestly don't think there's any difference. And I've built for both. I really believe strongly that you need to put the user first. The main thing, look, the process is going to be the same. You've got to build requirements. You've got to build a great user experience. You've got to put the user first. You've got to run a good dev process. You've got to, try to drive to good schedules. You've got to release early and often. There might be a difference in your ultimate quality bar, but that's just a matter of understanding your users, because generally your internal users have much greater pain because they have no systems that work, and they're willing to take anything and put up with a lot of bugs to get something to work, and they will call you if they have a problem. So maybe the only thing that's really different is that it's much easier to talk to your users inside your company. So you can do more training, and more training means you can have more complicated systems, but honestly that's a little bit of a cop-out, right? Because ideally you would spend another couple days and you would just make it work the nice, easy way. I don't think that there's a difference, and I think that to the extent that you build beautiful systems for your internal teams, you will be a huge celebrity because those people will talk to their VP or their president and say, "Boy, I really love the HR system we have." I don't know that anybody's ever said that, but if you build the HR system that people love, boy, you'll get promoted. Can you provide some examples of strong product-focused press releases? You also mentioned a blog post example, but I couldn't hear it. So it looks like Gene posted the Google Plus launch blog post in the group chat, which I would here. I'll take this and take a quick look at it. Yes, I think you did. I'll go ahead and I'll add this and I'll push it to the audience. The Google Plus blog post. Google Plus blog post. Okay. I select it and I push it. It should just give me one button rather than these two steps. So that's an example, I think, of something that's done well. The internal press releases, I have a couple that I use, and there's one in the book that I reference. I don't have anything sitting on the web that I can point to, because really what we're talking about is a press release that never gets out there. And honestly, press releases are a little bit old school now. I think that you're best to look at really good launch blog posts, find things that have had a lot of traction, that got tweeted a lot, that people understood, and I think that'll be useful. Let's see. I find the AARRR model, defined by David McClure at 500 stars, very useful, specifically for web-based e-commerce, subscription site, any other model that you think can be valuable. So this is a model for metrics in terms of, what should you measure, and how do you know what is working. So this is, at its most basic, the AARRR model is a funnel model. It's saying, where in the funnel are you losing people, and at what point are they converting, and how much traction are you getting? This is a great way to look at it, and I think you can apply the funnel model to all aspects of what you do. For example, you want to build a funnel for all actions of your product. Whether it's a vacuum cleaner and you're saying, okay, from out of the box to, first suck, how many steps do you have to go through? And where do people lose in that funnel? Run a usability test. Look at what happens in the field. Similarly, if you're dealing with hardline and you're trying to figure out, where is our distribution channel failing? You need to plot the distribution channel and measure the various steps and look at it as a funnel. Justin's comment sort of, I think, implies to some extent that there's a right answer here, and I'm not sure that there is. I think that the things you measure need to come through your mission. So if your mission is to help people share a whiteboard, then what you need to do is you need to say how many users, took a picture, and how many users got a shared whiteboard that they then looked at. You need to look at that funnel and understand them. And so I don't have any great sort of nice acronyms for you. You should think about that. I'm sure we could come up with something. But overall, I would say try to build a funnel and then look at it. Although I let me throw one other thing out there, which is that one of the things I talk about quite a bit is the fishbone model, which was defined by Arthur Deming. He wrote a lot about it. W. Edwards Deming. I got it wrong. He writes about this a lot, in which you ask the 5 whys, and you say, why isn't my product working? And then you brainstorm some answers. So the why isn't my product working is the line, and then you make some bones coming off this, some little fish bones. And those are the brainstormed ideas. So one of the brainstormed ideas might be, because it's too hard to use. And then you ask why again. So off that little spine, off that fish bone, you make some other little fish bones. Why is it too hard to use? Well, too clunky. The instructions were written in Greek and translated through Japanese to English, and so on and so forth. So using that 5 whys model, where you ask why 5 times, is very powerful for understanding what doesn't work and getting to solutions and answers. Jay Oza says, did you use DevOps? And the answer is no, in that we didn't use anything particular. We did have a developer operations organization that helped manage our systems, but not DevOps in particular. Let me see. Let me answer this other one. What specific technical skills did you have to know to do your work at both Amazon and Google? I think this is actually a really great question, because both these companies believe that as product managers, you need to be very, very technical. It means you need to be able to write code. The level of technical interviewing that I did, I was surprised by a lot of the candidates that I interviewed. And I asked, what's the difference between a get and a post? They would have no idea. And that was a problem. Or, what's a cache? And they wouldn't be able to answer that. Or what are some caching schemes? They wouldn't be able to answer that. So the short answer is you need to be reasonably proficient in understanding how to write software and how software works. And then you need to be deeper on some stuff that you probably didn't pick up, which are things like scaling. For example, how do you, what's hashing? What's a good hashing algorithm? And, when you're going to, if you needed to store users in a database, what would be a good way, in a distributed database, what would be a good way of finding them? How would you retrieve them? How would you store them, organize them? I talk a bit in the book about what you need to know about scaling, service-oriented architectures, and why they're great. I think you need to know that stuff. I think you need to understand, how to build a good service-oriented architecture and the different layers and parts of the stack, and things, and where service chaining, what service chaining is, and why that's bad, and how to work around it. I think you need to understand how to build good APIs, and what those look like and what they mean. And then I think you need to understand basically scaling, where the different points of how to build a system that scales. So where load balancers come in, what distributed systems look like, how some of the basic frameworks work, what replication looks like, what eventual consistency is and what it means. There are a bunch of things there. And then I think the other question from Jay is, was there anything you did at the two companies that was so different and unique that we can take away? I've tried to put a little bit of that in there, but I know that a lot of this stuff actually, I think is unique in the industry, although maybe you feel, I can see how a lot would feel like, well, this is all sort of basic, obvious stuff. And if you're pretty deep on this, yeah, it should seem pretty basic and obvious. I think that the answer is that one of the things that's different is that every team at Google behaves differently, and the same thing is true with Amazon. Your team anneals itself over time to a way of working that can either be good or bad. Hopefully you will help construct it in a way that is good. And by good I mean, it has good velocity. It has metrics that it lives by. You are not the boss of it. It focuses on the user, and it does things that have meaning, right? These are all things that make good, meaningful teams. Teams that aren't too big. These teams, though, will work in different ways. They'll communicate differently. They'll have slightly different processes, and you, as a product manager, hopefully, will be flexible and will help that team to realize their processes in a very efficient, powerful way. And I think that is probably the most interesting thing. There really was no one right way of doing things. So I would say, if you take, one thing out of the few dozen that we talked about today away and you offer it to your team, I would say take this stuff and offer it. Don't prescribe it to your team. I had an engineering manager I know who came into the team at Google and he said, okay, so we're going to do Scrum. And, later that afternoon, his director came to him and said, you have a problem. Your team is in revolt. This is a true story at Google. Team literally went into revolt. They were like, Scrum, no, we're not going to do Scrum. You're kidding me. And he's like, I just thought they needed some structure. And no, And by the way, you don't get to say that. You don't get to make that call. You get to guide. So bring these things in a suggestion and empower the team. And that's the way we leave it. I want to thank everybody for coming today. This is great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for the great questions. Jay definitely asked the hardest questions. So Jay, point to you. Thank you to Risto Hidalgo who points out the Deming's PDCA model. Yeah, I really, you could do worse than to try to do everything Deming did. Better yet, I should probably just say go do everything that Deming did, and you'd be in good shape. You're somebody to definitely pay attention to. Okay, thank you all very much. And Yasmina, if there's nothing else.
Chris, thank you so much for yet another outstanding webcast today. Very fascinating information you talked about, and we really thank you for sharing all your knowledge and expertise and your stories. It just makes it more and more something that we can all relate to as you were reading the questions in the group chat, and folks are very excited about your book. And yes, folks, with that, I will let you know Chris's book is the O'Reilly Deal of the Day, and what that means for you all is you can get it today at a really great price. As a thank you for attending the webcast, we did push out some details to you all in your group chat about how to go about doing it. So if you didn't open the group chat, please do before you leave our event. Good, valuable information there. You can also visit O'Reilly.com. Look on the right-hand side. You can't miss it. The book is right there at a great price today, and you can start implementing and working through all the great information Chris has in that book to help you with your day-to-day. Chris, thank you again. Folks that attended, thank you. We hope you benefited. This will conclude today's webcast. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Have a great day.